lovely listeners. I'm Sarah Cudmore, creator of the homeschool app Collage from Homegrown Learning. Today, I'm really chuffed to be joined by the wonderful Anna Dusseau. Anna is an ex-secondary school teacher, a freelance writer. She's got an amazing blog called The Homeschool Guru. She's a full-time homeschool mum of 3. I don't know how you fit that in, but and Anna has just launched an amazing new book called The Case for Homeschooling, which we'll touch on through this interview. It is actually really inspiring book. I can definitely vouch for that. So, and you may even have come across Anna in a recent article that she did for The Guardian. So welcome, Anna, and thanks for your time today. I know you're visiting family, so I'm even more grateful. That's fab. Thank you. Do you want to just sort of kick off and tell us, you know, you've been a teacher, but like how did you go from being a teacher to then homeschooling your children?
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And it's a funny one, the teacher question, because I think that what I notice is that there's a lot of interest in teachers who have then gone into home education. And for example, John Holt, who is also a teacher, is given a lot of credence by people in the home educated community. And I feel both that it's important, but also that it's really important to not professionalize home education. And I think anyone who is moving from teaching into home education feels that very strongly. So it's such a difficult line to walk, because on the one hand, you've got a lot to offer people, especially people considering home education as a choice, because obviously people who are experienced home educators, they've got their style, they've got their thing that works for their family, and that is the beauty. That is both the beauty and the kind of the wide disparity of alternative and home education, is that everyone's different. You can't model on one family. Every family has their rhythm. But for people who are considering home education, there's a big value to that teacher input. The reason is that we can be honest about the system.
Yeah.
We really can see what the problems are, and we really can unveil what, for many teachers, was a big part of their decision-making process. So for example, when someone tells me in a position of management in a school, we will tackle this bullying issue through X, Y, and Z, or we believe that this phonics approach is going to work because of X, Y, and Z, I know how the system works, and I know full well it's not going to work, and it has been proven not to work over sort of decades and decades of experience. So that's useful for people, and it's also useful to compare and contrast the learning methods, which aren't always so different, but that are impossible to implement meaningfully in the classroom. So I do feel that through that role as a teacher, there's a lot to offer. And I will tell you how I moved from teaching in a minute, but I just want to touch on that professional aspect. It's really important for people to not feel that have so many people who are very new to home education who have contacted me saying, but of course you as a teacher are in the best position to home educate. And in the very first chapter of my book, I make it so clear I am in the worst position to home educate. And so my book is all about, if I can do it, so can you, because I have been the most institutionalized and the most believing in education and sit down and learn this. And for me to be radicalized, and I mean radicalized in the real sense of the term, getting to the root of what learning and life is about, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And some of the people who feel that they are the least qualified to home educate, for example, people who maybe didn't complete formal education themselves, feel, how could I possibly prepare my child for this? But they must grasp the concept that it is, in many ways, the less professionalized you are as a person, the more easily you will slip into home education and release your children's potential, which is all it is about,
Yeah, actually, I did a podcast specifically about that, and really because I wanted those sorts of people to be able to get grandparents, whoever, to listen to it, to realise that actually anyone can home educate, and actually, the likes of us that have been in the profession we can vouch for it, So yeah, great.
So very briefly, teaching was such a funny journey for me. I mean, anyone who saw my interview in The Guardian, it's very strange seeing like an article come out of actually a long amount of time I spent with that journalist, and lots of things came out of it, and it was all fine, the article, but it was a very small window into how, you know, I moved into
Yeah.
teaching. But really for me, education was very challenging. I hated school. I found school incredibly challenging, although I was academically able, but that just means you can pass exams, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I dropped out of university twice, you know, and it eventually, you know, I'll be totally honest with you, you've got to be real with people, because everyone's journeys are real journeys. You know, I was not someone with a vision and someone with a
Yeah.
kind of a life vision of how I wanted to give back to the community. No, my parents were like, Anna, get a job, please get a job. And I knew I could teach easily. I knew I was well qualified for that. And so I just was like, stuff it, I'll be a secondary school teacher. And the reason I say this, in so many, and many people may feel angered by that and that I'm, you know, mocking the profession. I'm not, but I've met a lot of teachers who meet the same criteria, who were just like,
Yeah.
oh, stuff it, it's a regular salary. I quite like kids. I quite get on with kids. Absolutely sure I can teach my subject to kids. And so I just think it's just so important to deconstruct this mythology of the kind of the benevolent, you know, teacher that just wants to give back. I mean, there was a bit of that for me when I trained
Yeah.
at the Institute, but it quickly wore off when I started teaching in London academies and realizing the kind of factory style reality of what you were doing. And so I think simply what that gave me was, and there's obviously a whole journey into having my own children and how I felt about nursery, because I was in management at that point and I couldn't reduce my hours. I don't think that would wash nowadays, but this was before
No.
hashtag me too. So it was like, you want to have a baby, but you better come back full time. Anyway, but the long story is that basically once my children started nursery school and then into, for my daughter, she started primary school, I think that maybe what helps when you're a teacher is that you have a very keen critical eye, and that you see quickly the things that are problematic that probably other parents also see. But maybe once you've taught for a while, it does give you that that confidence in yourself to know when your criticism is spot on, and to know when people can say things as much as they like, it isn't going to be resolved. And the thing is, I've met many people who have withdrawn their child simply maybe in year 2 or year 3, and they weren't teachers, and it simply took them a little bit longer to get to the point that I got, you know, a couple of terms into reception, to just be like, no, you can't solve these issues. No, this isn't the best place for my child. I think it's just a quicker decision to make,
And
maybe, when you know the system from the inside.
And do you think, like, because I think I wholeheartedly believed in what I was doing when I was a head teacher, and it wasn't until I had children and they started to go through my own school, which, you know, I deeply loved and valued every teacher in that school, but actually I started to see the other side as a parent, and the child, and what the child's journey was and what was expected of them, and that for me just didn't sit right in my stomach. And then I started to, you know, readdress and think, how can I change this? I spent 2 years trying to change everything, fighting against government, you know, but actually realized I just had to leave, because that change can't happen without big stuff.
Oh yeah, and I think that, you know, obviously we can sort of deconstruct the whole schooling argument right down to, like, school institutions are not places in which real education can take place, for many reasons. Having said that, it's something that is going to be part of the fabric of our lives because of many people's jobs. So schools do need to be better. I mean, I was speaking to someone in America who was saying to me, the thing is, so many children home educate in the States that what it's actually done is it's put real pressure, financial pressure, sure, but it's the first time schools are listening, to force schools to change the offer for children, to make much more flexibility in terms of what they're going to study, the flexibility of home learning. Forget COVID, but in certain states, home learning is just an option for kids that are, for example, school refusing. They're not going to be forced into school because they just know that they're going to home educate otherwise. And sometimes it actually is a powerful motivator of change in the school system to withdraw your children. And people say, oh, you know, middle class parents withdrawing their children. It's simply not the case. People from all walks of life do it.
Really
but regardless of the argument, it actually is a weapon of change, forcing the system to listen and to say, this isn't fit for the modern world. This isn't fit for the kind of children that we're trying to produce, who are ready for the world, you know, and who could have learnt it themselves. And, you know, I read, I think it was one of Carol Black's essays, that was saying it is so problematic that it is not common knowledge in teaching that kids can teach themselves to read. And I remember reading this and thinking, it's very problematic. It's very problematic. I agree entirely with what you said about, you know, for me, I disliked school and I felt in my bones that school was not the right place for me. But there was no vocabulary in the world that I was growing up in to describe that as anything other than you can be a dropout or you can fix up and go to school. So I grew up with this mentality of, I have this kind of dropout side to me, but I know I'm capable of passing exams, so I'm going to fix up and fit the system. And it took me, 30 years of my life to be able to disentangle myself from that and to realize that it's not as black and white as that, and that there is something inherently not functional about the school system. And like you, the minute that I started home educating my children, which was not an intentional long-term move, it only became an intentional, we could do this for the rest of their childhood if they want to, within about, I would say it took about a month or two of me just every day, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because it was totally contrary to the way I'd grown up, to the imaginative kind of way that the language that we all use about education and about what our expectations are of teaching and learning and growing and school, and everything I'd learned through my teacher training, and everything I sort of disagreed with but felt it was the way things had to be as a teacher. I didn't hate my job on a day-to-day basis, but I did feel that a lot of it was, kicking a flock of sheep unwillingly through a kind of, and I felt that, is there other ways that we could tweak this, change this, make it better? But at the end of the day, I knew nothing about learning and about real learning until I watched my own children doing it for themselves the minute I backed off of them and that everyone backed off of them. And that was why I felt so compelled to write, to blog, to write this book, to just get it out there, because it's like, people just don't know. Teachers just don't know that kids are perfectly capable of learning themselves. And it's extraordinary where we've got ourselves to in a couple of generations of coercive schooling, of forced mass schooling, that we've got ourselves to the point where we just have no living memory of anything else. We just literally accept it and have lost touch entirely with the way children can learn. And like you, it was just a revelation, a daily revelation for me. And really, the book is just about what I've learned from my kids.
It's archaic, really. The system is archaic, and I can only think back to like the first phase of my head teacher role, which was like 14 years ago. There were conversations, we were talking about actually some children prefer to learn outside, some children like to lie down when they're writing, drawing. There were those conversations, but then government changes, all sorts of things happen, and actually it was more testing. Let's test them with their timetables, let's do this, and I think you're totally right. People do not know. People, parents, they genuinely feel they're doing the right thing. This is what we do in society. We send them to school. That's where they're going to get their social skills. That's where they're going to get, and that's going to lead them to a job. And and actually, it's not true.
No.
So I when I came across you, I just felt this huge because I think you're right. It needs people from education. I actually know I've met probably about 10 homeschooling parents in the last 2 years, which in Cornwall's quite a lot, but that have come out of the system, that have seen that same journey. So that is growing rapidly. But how did you write a book? Because you have only been home. How long have you been home educating?
We're a year now. We've just finished a year. Yeah,
that is mental. And you've written a book.
I know. The book began autobiographically. It was it's a funny story. I mean, so we speak French at home. My husband is French, and I speak French, and we speak French at home with our kids. And I came across Terry Dougherty's free range education book, and I loved it and just connected with all the diversity of the stories and the kind of pick and mix nature where you could just go, no, that wouldn't be me. Oh, that would be us. That would be us. And I contacted Martin at Hawthorne Press, and I just said, I love this book. I could do a French translation. Do you think there'd be a French publisher that'd be interested in it? Would Terry give us the rights for that? Would you give us the rights for that? I'd love to translate it. Because I was doing I was blogging. I'd started blogging, but I was doing little writing jobs, but nothing big. But I thought this would be a nice way in, And he was up for it, but Terry wasn't up for it. And so then a few emails pinged back and forth about, but there is, it feels like a time for another book. This was before the pandemic. And I sort of looked at my husband, and he knows I'd love to write at some point, but I mean, I had really just begun my blog, and I did not feel like I had anything to contribute to the world of homeschooling.
Yeah.
And he said, look, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth like that. You've got to say, I'd love to write a book. You'd be stupid, you'd be churlish not to. So I sort of said, this is my blog. If you're interested, I do. Yeah. Anyway, so the whole book was initially autobiographical. It was initially half my story of us basically learning what home education was, and then half the stories that make up a big part of the book, all the different stories and contributors, and they're all fantastic. But then that first draft didn't feel right, and it's been through a couple of drafts. It was quite exhausting. But what actually emerged at the end of it was that what I'd been holding back the whole way through and had not wanted to contribute to the book was my professional gaze as a teacher. I felt so strongly that I didn't want to professionalize something that is inherently a non-professional process and that is giving children back their voice and their freedom, that I did not want to put like a professional brushstroke over it. But after we realized that the first few drafts just weren't really working in terms of what the book could contribute, I kind of just had this stroke of realizing that what I have to contribute is this big comparison, is this big, like you, I know the system, I know all the principles of the system, and I know fundamentally why it can't work. And here's what I've learned about home education and everything about it that in many ways matches much of mainstream teaching pedagogy. It's just you can't do it in schools. It's not a case of teachers are, aiming to disable all teachers. No, not all teachers, but most teachers probably are well-intentioned, understand the pedagogy of how children learn, maybe don't have the extreme unschooling approach that many people take in home education, but nonetheless would be much in favor of more child autonomy, deep dives, freedom over, forgetting any kind of curriculum, less testing. We all get this. Much less sedentary lifestyles. Everyone gets it. It can't be done in the classroom. And my book became a book, although there's lots of little autobiographical dips in it, it became a book about what I know about teaching and what I know about how it simply cannot be done.
Yeah. No, it's and do you, in just you touching on, like, a lot of people are unschooling at the moment, do you unschool, do you radically unschool or unschool, or do you not kind of put yourself in a box, as it were?
So like most home educators, I would say we're on a journey, and we're really just at the beginning of our journey. And we're also at a particular stage in our journey. So I have young children. My daughter's coming up to 7, my middle son's coming up to 5, and then we have a little one coming up to 2. And so the way I didn't start out like this, but within about a month it was clear my children were not going to be taught anything by me. So they have deschooled me, they have unschooled me. And because I'm a teacher, I'm an academic high achiever myself, which I am very aware does not mean that I am intellectually anywhere. I just simply am a test passer myself, and I know that I have a lot of deschooling myself to do with removing value that I place on academic grades and things like that. So because they're so young, and because they're so obviously not into anything that I have to say regarding let's sit down and learn about the Tudors, we were deschooled and unschooled from the word go. And much of the reading that I've done has made me feel very strongly that unschooling is a very important concept to grasp for homeschooling, but also for society. So I feel myself in my heart leaning more and more towards, I suppose, radical unschooling. I notice everything about the interactions I have, just human interactions with my children, being much less, well, it's bedtime, mummy says it's, and much more like, do you feel tired? Well, I don't know. When you start, just much more treating them as equals than me as the authoritarian figure. Having said that, they are very young, and I feel that at the moment we have a very slack rope in which to give many years ahead of us, where I have no interest in forcing anything down them that they don't want to learn. If they want to play in the sand, if they want to just talk about numbers, if they want to pick up, we go to the library, they are learning all the time, and I'm more than happy with that. But I know plenty of people who have slightly older children who really do want to pass a couple of examinations, or who want to prepare for an apprenticeship or something they're going to need a certain qualification for. And those children are doing online courses and online study. And so they have their day organized between a period of online study, and then the rest of the day is devoted to hobbies, friends, activities, things that they want to do. And that's absolutely valid, and particularly because it's child directed.
Yeah.
But what I must say is that I also do have some friendships with other homeschooling parents who school their children at home and who have a curriculum that they consider far superior to the British curriculum, and they consider it, much more comprehensive, much more, I don't know if you'd use the word classical education because it's quite modern in many ways, but their children, yes, I wouldn't argue with them, their children are year groups ahead of their schooled peers, and their children, it wouldn't be for me. And I feel quite strongly that what it is schooling your children at home. Having said that, their children, I think, are still better off than in school, because they do manage to collapse it into just a couple of hours in the morning.
Yes,
and they do have the freedom, if they have a bit of a snotty nose, to just hang out on the sofa and not do it. They still have the whole rest of their day for groups and playing. And I've never met anyone who schools their children from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. Even really strict home schoolers with a very clear timetable and curriculum and everything just do it in a couple of hours in the morning. And it wouldn't be for us, but I always feel I have something to learn from people like that, often just good resources, resources that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, and actually, I'm similarly met lots of families like that, and I think you do have to take into account as well as the age of your child, the development, and what your child wants. That there are some children who really get a kick out of like a little notebook with activities to do in it, and that style of thing. And I think the big thing about even schooling from home is that the children aren't suppressed. Even in their learning is much more condensed, but when children instinctively have all those beautiful questions, they're not suppressed. And that for me is one of the biggest things about school, is when an idea pops up in their head, it's like, oh no, it's not the right time for that, oh, we'll come across that when we do science next term, or
Exactly.
So even if they're formally schooling, there will still be all those opportunities, I'm sure, for that kind of thought process.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my friends, but I mean, so many people's children fit this mold. My friend's son he's precocious. He wants to know everything, and I really enjoy when we meet up with him, because all the others run along ahead, and he walks along next to me, and he just grills me on things that I don't know the answers to, and he loves it because it's really quite a challenging conversation. But I find him just an amusing person to be around. He makes my brain work harder, and he's only 7. Anyway. But I've said to my friend before, and she agrees, although she's not a teacher herself, but she just knows how it would have played out in the classroom for him. Yeah. I said, your son is dynamite, but he would have been a nightmare in the classroom. Absolutely. If I had him walk into a secondary school, I'd spot him a mile off, and I'd be like, I'm so sorry, but for the benefit of the 31 other children in my class, I'm going to have to squash you quickly, because I don't have time for that at the end of lessons. I don't have time for that with changeover, with marking, with this, with that. If you put your hand up and start waffling away on one of your interesting questions, I'm going to have lost 30 to 40% of the class who won't even know what you're talking about. That's not diminishing them. No. Less academic children have something really to offer too, but school doesn't value it.
No.
So it's not the fact that other children would be lost with your question that diminishes them. It's just that you're on totally different wavelengths, and all your wonderful curiosity I would have to squash to be able to simply move forward with the lesson. It's such a shame, and I think people all know, teachers know that children all have something to offer, but I hear so much of this kind of talk of that children need school, and children are seen as minors, and children are seen as lesser than adults, and schooling is required to bring children up to a level where they can participate in society, rather than that we have anything to learn from them and from their fresh-faced view on the world. But in particular, we see children from poor backgrounds as needing school, needing schooling, because their parents are poor, and therefore surely their parents can't offer them what's being provided through school. Surely their parents can't provide them with the kind of, basically what we're saying is, economic opportunities that possibly school could offer them. But it's so worrying that we place the entire emphasis on jobs, economy, progress, who is this really benefiting? You
And
know,
I would really argue, I used to really argue about that whole deprivation data analysis, because actually I used to find some of those children, basically they just haven't been heard. They haven't been, they haven't had the space to listen or ask those questions for whatever reason, whether that's parental or whether that's how society sees them. But actually, I'm in no doubt that those children couldn't actually make a happy lifestyle for themselves if they were not put in that box, and if they were not perceived to be that child. And if school was different, if school allowed for them to ask questions, and school, really kind of, rather than trying to give them intervention to bring them up to the same level as the average child of that class, that really breaks my heart, actually. But
yeah, and you can't homogenize children that way. It's the diversity in society that makes society. And as you say, a lot of the children who you might see as academically underperforming, and then often because they simply feel rubbish behaviorally, it drops off the edge as well. But you see them leave school and plug into something that maybe works better for them. And this should have happened a long time ago. They should never have been forced through so much of an experience that basically erodes their self-confidence. You see them as a whole person then, and they're themselves, and they talk equally to you, and they make eye contact with you, and also, who's to say that people are happier in higher earning, higher grade type work? One of the blog posts I wrote ages ago was about one of my top English students, international baccalaureate English students, who I just was sure was going to go to Cambridge or something like that, because he had the grades for it. And like a year later, I found him working in a mobile phone shop. And I remember, and it wasn't a gap year job, it was a job. And I remember like feeling as if I'd failed him, as if my job was to get kids like that, if you're bright, you can be up there in the top whatever earning percentage. If you're not, sorry, but you're going to have less money. And of course, less happiness that goes with it. I mean, there's a certain amount of truth in that you don't want not enough money to literally put food on the table. No. But the way that we devalue, we value intellect and we devalue skill. The mechanic gets paid less, when actually we couldn't function without our cars. And then someone who tinkers around with network engineering, creating games that are just addling our kids' brains, we pay them super money to create jobs that are in no way, in my opinion, massively, Peter Gray would say differently, but massively benefiting society. I don't know. I just feel like there's such a revision of education that could be happening right now, and the government is not seizing that opportunity at all. I mean, let's not get into politics, but it's a shame, because this would be a lovely turning point to revise what the offer could be educationally.
It would. It's a perfect turning point, but it is clear that is not going to happen.
As you said earlier in the interview, every time that there's a doubt, there's a doubling down, and this is we can observe that going back over decades.
Yeah. So your book. Actually, I feel that your book is probably one of the most comprehensive homeschool books that I've read recently. I really love the stories from all the different people and all the things that they've tried and where they kind of came to. But for me, I mostly loved that new concept of learning moments, and I feel like this is the most important part of homeschooling. Like it's about how you value the learning within everything that they do. Do you want to expand on that new concept for listeners?
So again, this kind of comes back to the conversation we were having earlier around the way that moving from schooling, particularly teaching, into home educating was a kind of daily revelation for me. And what I realized for my children, where I realized the learning was coming from, were just daily natural moments when their minds were either through their own triggering, or through a situation that we were in, or through interactions with another home educated family, anything like that, just when you could see the light going on in their eyes, not that the light's ever off, but when you could see them light up, and when you could see them gain a sudden interest in something and want to know more. And that can be very simple concept. I'll tell you what I mean, but that is learning. So for example, it just simplified learning for me, made me realize that a page of mathematics is nothing compared to my son saying to me when I'm just cooking, what's 100 add 1? What do you think it is? Okay. What's 200 add 1? Well, what do you think it is? Okay. What's 300 add 1? Mm-hmm. And then he just walks away.
Yeah.
And that seems like nothing, but that is actually a maths lesson in itself. And that learning moments, it could be a favorite song, and your kids jumping on the sofa listening to a favorite song. Their brains are lit up, they're singing, they're listening, they're being active in their bodies. They're learning something there that might not be on the curriculum, but they're learning freedom and expression and rhythm. And my daughter, for example, she is, fascinated in by the ancient Egyptians and by lots of things to do with history. And sometimes we'll just be going along on our bikes or walking through the woods, and she'll just ask me an idle question, and I'll either know the answer and I'll give it to her, or if I don't know the answer, I'll tell her how we could find that out. And often later on in the day, there'll be an opportunity where we might naturally make a phone call to someone who does know, or look up on Google, or in a book. Now, these are very small moments. These are things that in a school are still done, but that might be a starter activity. That might be a 5-minute brain teaser starter activity. But the difference is when it's initiated by the child, it's caused all this kind of brain connectivity. And I know because I feel my brain doing it. When my kids bring these questions to me, I feel my own brain lighting up, firing up. You can just feel it in yourself, and you can see it in your children. And a moment of that is worth a term of schooling.
Yeah.
Because it's initiated, and it just makes their brains, it's about giving your child's brain the capacity to think in different ways, rather than giving your child's brain the information they will need, because who knows what information they're going to need. It's all just filling buckets, as they say, isn't it? It's, a child who is able to think, able to research, able to ask questions, and free to do so, passing examinations is nothing at that point. I mean, once you've got a child at that, you want to pass an examination age 16, fine. I mean, start tinkering away age 14, figuring out which ones you want to sit. Might take you 6 months to a year to get that ready at home, maybe less. All you want is an aptitude and an openness, and a sense of who you are and a sense of what you're interested in.
Yeah, and as you've described there, those are those like greater depth thoughts, and I think in school you're taught something in a lesson, and then it's hoped that later on at some stage teachers will see the child using that information in a greater depth. That's what they're looking for, but of course it doesn't happen, because those moments when that child wants to do that or ask those questions, they can't happen. And even like in a subject like the Egyptians, when they might brainstorm the Egyptians at the beginning, actually if your child's really fascinated in like how the Egyptians went to the toilet, that's not going to get answered through that kind of thing. But and when you were talking about seeing your child's brain like their eyes light up when those connections were made, and it just reminds me that that's kind of where I came to. I basically, when I started homeschooling, I started taking loads of photos. I de-schooled, I formally schooled, then I de-schooled because I realized it wasn't working. And, while I was de-schooling, I just started capturing the learning via photos, really, because I was just wanting to like reassure myself that actually there's heaps of stuff going on. And that was how I created the app Collage, because actually then I wanted to sort of put the learning into, or they're in subject categories, but then I was able to actually see, oh my gosh, look at the I hate using the word progress, but look at look at where they've come from and where they've gone to in terms of their learning moments. So Gray mentions that hunter-gatherers didn't distinguish work from play like we do. And what do you think is happening as a result of us, I mean, not us personally, but like the system doing that?
Well, I think that we have strayed a long way from what we're biologically meant to be doing. Homo sapiens have been anatomically modern, and as we are now for around 100,000 years, I believe. Civilization dates back to sort of 9,000-10,000 years, but civilization as we really know it, more like 5,000 or 6,000 years. And school like this, state schooling, has almost a 200-year history, but in the UK less than that, about 150 years. It's nothing. It's a glimpse, it's a moment, it's a blip in human history where we've decided to do something that there have been major turning points in human history in, because we talk about this like as if human beings have been around for a long time. We haven't. Like the history of the earth, the history of other animal species, the longer history of, of old world monkeys and apes and our kind of hominin ancestors has a much longer history. But Homo sapiens, as we are, we have evolved to live in small family and community groups and to raise our children close to us and in groups where local information is actually quite complex and quite diverse, but is learned all through observation, very like, hunter-gatherer societies, very few of which still exist today. And what we forget about this, whatever we think about the pros and cons, and I'm not idealizing the hunter-gatherer life, things like infanticide and, wife strangling in Papua New Guinea, in one of the tribes, I think it was in Papua New Guinea. I'm not idealizing that. But our brains have evolved a certain way over generations and generations and generations, dating back, if you look at pre-Homo sapien ancestors, millions of years, a few million years. And we have suddenly taken some very, very wildly different steps in our civilization that simply we are struggling to cope with. And you see that in mental health issues, in self-harm and suicide, which does not exist in any other group in the animal kingdom. It's just us who does this. And, we look at like the agricultural revolution was a big turning point. Industrial revolution was a big turning point. Schooling was a really big turning point. And schooling shapes the fabric of the society that then is going to become how society is acted out. And there are very simple things about schooling that are not natural and that continue to take our society, our species in an unnatural direction. I don't want people to take this wrongly when I say I'm against globalization, I'm against the global community. I don't believe in it. I don't think that we were ever made to run in packs this big. That doesn't mean I don't think that white and black and brown people can mix together. What I mean is this vision we have of the whole world getting along and being a big community is rubbish. In Africa, you have, I think it is called lower west coast or lower westland gorillas and lower eastland gorillas. They've never mixed. They don't cross Africa, gorillas. And so they're happy in their groups. Now, I'm not saying do not move around and do not mix, but this idea that 35 children in a class is a happy place to be, this idea that social media with all these different people's voices from all over the world, all different cultural differences, that we find it hard enough to understand when we go and visit another country and try to understand it. Of course it's going to lead to toxic relations. This idea, this office culture, that school feeds into an office culture. I mean, school is born out of industry and factory and continues to manufacture an industrial model for the workplace, which is not necessary with the connectivity that we now have. I think there could be much more home working and within the community localized working. And really, I'm working on a second book at the moment, which isn't about home education. It's about precisely that. It's about renaturalizing childhood, renaturalizing the human experience. And one of the big concepts is relocalizing our experience. That doesn't mean rejecting other cultures at all. It's the opposite. There are many, many articles that suggest that actually home educated children who have much less perhaps of a broad spectrum of people they're mixing with every day, although there's lots of actually diversity in the community, but yeah, sure, they're not going to a classroom with thousands of children in that school every day from all different walks of life, but actually that creates divisiveness, that creates polarization. Of course, we're just simple old world monkeys. No one runs in a tribe that big. We're not termites. It creates a hardened mentality, a hostility and aggression towards others. We're overworked, we're overstressed, we have lots of chronic health problems, I think, that are as a result. And this is stuff I've believed before, I started home educating. I feel it's unhealthy the way that we live right now, and it's not true to our nature as big mammals, essentially. And we forget ourselves, we forget our place in the world, and we forget who we are. And I think that if we could relocalize experience, reduce working hours, change that division, as you say, between play and learning, and try to find a way to get people living more in the world and work being a natural part of just your daily life with your children around you, maybe if they're being home educated, or simply just finding a less extreme version of the where we've come to as a society. I think we might be able to tackle more things like the environment, more things like racism, more of the big societal problems, because I think this fallacy that we can tackle it through school, which is in itself creating this unhealthy society, is just nonsense. It's just nonsense.
Just its setup of school, in the fact that they are organized in year groups, is so unnatural in comparison. You know, they're set up in year groups and then they go out to play, and they still stay in those year groups because that's what they feel that they should. They sit in assembly in those year groups, they go on trips in those year groups. And actually, you know, when you think of our sort of family setup, and you know, when I go to home ed groups and you see the children interacting, you know, 14-year-olds with 5-year-olds, and it's so natural, and it works actually, and so much less like angst, and so much more support and modelling and all sorts of amazing things. You can
and it's
see.
one of the things that I feel really strongly when I look, and again, I don't want to ruffle people's feathers, but it's what I feel to be true. I see so many people struggling with being a parent, struggling with just the basics of, you're a parent now, so I guess you're going to have to focus on that phase in your life. And I'm sorry for people that struggle with that, but during lockdown, I heard so many people climbing the walls, just unable to cope with having their children with them all the time. I think a big problem with that was the way that home education was provided by the schools, no doubt about that. But I think that a lot of us, we've grown up totally self-focused and isolated from wider family and what it's like to be in a family. From the minute we start school, our brothers and sisters are just people we tag in and out with in the evening, but anyway, they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing, they've got different level homework to us. It's a little bit competitive. We're not really taking care of our little brothers and sisters. We're more like, oh, I'm in year 2 and you're in whatever. And we don't really have experience of caring for younger siblings in a lot of families, not in all families, because we're focused on our grades and on our future and on where we're going and on being in our tight-knit team in school of you know, peers in the same year group. Then we go out into the adult world and we don't have time for children. When we have children, we send them to nursery. I sent my daughter to nursery when she was 10 months old. You know, they go to nursery and we pick them up and then we give them bath time, and God, that's exhausting, and then off they go to bed. And we've just completely lost the commitment of what it is to be a parent. We look at, I'm not saying that I'm not an anti, what's the word, you know, that people who are into, you know, don't have children, you shouldn't have children, you know, I'm not that radical, but we look at the, you know, the way that we have just overpopulated the planet to the point that it's unsupportable. You know, we can't continue with this level of growth. We're going to just extinguish any resources to feed ourselves. But the thing is, we can't even parent our own children. Maybe if it's too tough for us to do more than bath time Monday to Friday and a bit of weekends and holidays, we should consider how many children we're having, because if we have to outsource everything, that would create a natural check if we had to take it all on ourselves. So all I feel is that the school process takes children away from all that natural mixed age learning, the natural parenting skills that you're going to need in older life. When my daughter was born, it was the first time I'd ever changed a nappy. It's mad, you know, and I think to myself, you know, it's no wonder that we see parents on their phones with their children strapped into buggies, turned in their buggies facing the wall away from them on their own screens, when they've spent almost the whole of their childhood and teenage years in isolation from children anyway. And the minute children are born, mothers are encouraged to get straight back to work and send them into nursery. It's very unhealthy and it's very worrying, and it places a lot of blame on the individual when actually it's just that we're operating in such unhealthy conditions that no one's given a chance to know even how to do it right.
No, and there was a lovely example recently of a friend of mine who's obviously the children were off for such a long period of time with COVID
Yeah.
and stuff. And she said that when it first happened, her children were a nightmare. They just hated each other. Everything was a problem. And she said when they went back to school a couple of weeks ago, they were so sad to be not together. And that they had formed this over that period of time. They'd refound each other and found a love and a connection, and then they went back to school, and she said it's just gone exactly, one's in reception and one's in year 3, and it's like, I don't want to talk to her, she's in reception, that's a tiny little example, but just that feeling of separation and just like we are not as one in that short space of time. So yeah, it's sad. And but on the same side, I definitely feel that, and I think you talk about the whole family benefit in your book, and that's it, isn't it? The homeschooling, that whole family benefit. Like my children, it was hard at first for me to work from home while I was homeschooling, but actually there's a bit of mutual respect now, and there's a bit of understanding, and my children kind of know that I do a bit here, and then I'm around, and I'm there to facilitate, help with whatever they want, and they because they're seeing everything that happens, from the amount of washing there is, the meals that we cook. They're actually involved in every little piece of life, which I really feel is going to help them to be happier people when they grow up, because it isn't, you talked about the fact that when you're a parent, it's like, oh shit, now oh god, I've got no time to do all the things that I wanted to do, and but actually they will have grown up seeing those things and just seeing them as just part of life, and actually enjoying making the meal for everyone, because we're all going to sit down and chat about what's normally about farts or something with my moment, but I totally agree with you. I think it's a very sad place we've kind of come to, I think.
So many people say to me, but don't you want your children to ever be independent from you? And the thing is, we could go right the way back to, like continuum concept type stuff and co-sleeping and all the ways that we break bonds with our children. But I think school is a really big one.
Yeah.
And I think that some children are more sensitive to it than others. But I think that this fallacy that by shoving them off, dressed up like little business people in their little uniforms, off they go. Now that I've cut them away from me and sent them out into the crowd, they're going to be independent. I mean, my middle son, is the one who is the most like me in the family emotionally and in his headspace. He's quite reckless in what he does, but he feels a lot. And he was the one that did, and I know you're going to laugh at me here, he did 3 months of preschool, 3 mornings a week. That's all he's ever done. The baby's done nothing and will do nothing unless he wants to. And my eldest has done everything. Bless her, poor little thing. She's done full-time nursery. She's done preschool. We moved. She did another preschool. Anyway, to cut a long story short, 3 mornings a week for 3 months of preschool absolutely destroyed my middle son. And I have no doubt that what they told me, if you just keep at it, he will stop crying. I'm absolutely sure they're right. But we never got to that point. It was traumatic every morning. You're doing something, you're physically ripping your child from you, crying. Lots of children do. They're not necessarily as dramatic as my son, but they might be a bit not wanting to go, a bit tearful, or as one of my friend's children did last week, wrote his mother for the first time in his life, wrote, "I like home, mummy," on a piece of paper. You do these things to children. You have to accept you're going to reap the consequences of it. So for me, I hated school. I used to run away from school. I had physical fights with my parents about going to school for a long time until I gave into it. But when they eventually do give into it, I think we must, as parents, accept that we've made a firm choice. We've chosen to force them through a system. And not all children cry like that. But when children are showing you, this is making me ill, to make a choice to continue to force with it creates long-term consequences. It cuts something, it breaks something that can never really be redone, however much you try to work on it. And that child, and I know because I'm now that adult, might spend the rest of their life trying to redo, connectivity and relationship work that was massively damaged by forced schooling at way too young an age. In Finland, before now they have kindergarten, but for a long time, the Finnish government said we would never introduce schooling or kindergarten before 7 because we don't want to pay the social bill at the end of it.
Yes,
Forcing children away from their parents. At the other end, you're going to have unemployment, alcoholism, drug addictions, parents who can't take care of their children, a whole social bill that we don't want to pay. We'd rather pay for adults to have years of time to take care of their children until children are more emotionally ready for schooling. Now, of course, we could talk about schooling in itself as a no-no, but that's a much better model, much better, much healthier. My son, after 3 months, it's taken him most of this year of unschooling for him to trust me again, for him to start climbing onto my lap, giving me cuddles, asking me questions the way he used to, wanting to be carried by me on walks when he's tired. He really rejected me, and that was based on 3 months.
Yeah. Well, my daughter's 6, and I did the same. Actually, I found a childminder because I felt that was a better option for her. And then she went to nursery when she was 3.5. But she's still now at 6. She is so insecure about where I'm going. She still asks, and exactly the same. And one thing I just want to chip in with there is that whole concept of like, what the heck is it about when schools are like not allowing parents to come in and drop their children off? I know there's like all this COVID stuff going on where
that's separate.
But it's like, well, they're in year 1 now, they've done a year, you've been allowed to come in the classroom and help
them. They're 5 years old now.
But now you're going to leave them in the playground, and it's like, why? What is that about? It's control. It's I have no doubt. In fact, my son, who's 9, has just started doing some clubs, and he's ready, he's happy, he's forming those independent sort of strings to his bow where he feels confident to go off, and he's only just been to someone's house to play because he feels ready, and he trusts, and he knows that I'm going to be there. So I just totally agree. I think we've got this like fear that they won't be okay unless we do it like this, and actually, if we look at the research, it's there. They will be independent, they will thrive, but actually they won't thrive, like you say, if they're forced.
I must just say, when you're talking about your son there and your daughter, because obviously my children are just a couple of years younger, and it's really lovely to hear you describing those stages, because it really helps me to normalize in my head again for myself what is normal. Because one of the things I do at the beginning of my book is that I talk about what I feel just instinctively. It's not based on research, it's just based on knowing kids, having taught kids for years, and my own kids, having been a child myself, what I feel the stages are, the basic stages are of childhood. There are 3 that I describe, and it's just, and the first one I call the bubble. And I say it goes up to about 8 years old. Steve Biddulph, who wrote the foreword for my book, he would say up to about 7 years old. For your son, up to about 9 years old. But that's totally normal. That kind of flexibility of boundaries is what it's all about. For another child, it might be more like up to about 11 or 12 or 13 years old. It just, all children are different. But we have this vision of, because we've all been schooled ourselves, because we've lost living memory of what life was like before school starting. Didn't used to start age 4, but it does now, and we've just got used to that. We get used to things very quickly. That's part of our kind of smart primate brain. We quickly adapt to things, and we just assume now children need to be socialized. They need to be socialized for school age 4, so you better start age 3, preschool, get them ready for school. Why don't we just start when they're born? Let's just start socializing them straight away, so that even people like my parents, who I think would consider themselves, liberal, and consider themselves to be open to the idea of homeschooling, all the differences, they have a big concern about, well, what about socialization? What about clubs? What about this? What about that? And although it knocks my confidence, because we do see people, and we do go to some clubs, and we do have some families that we're touching base with. We're new to homeschooling, and also with COVID, it hasn't been that easy.
No.
It shakes my confidence. But then when I just calm down and I just look at my children and I think about it, I'm like, they are 6, 4, and 1. I am stressing myself out over a construct that has been given to me as this is normal. But actually, they're happy as anything. They're not
Yeah.
asking for anyone.
Mm.
All these little friendships that, I'll be straight with you, I used to force in the playground because I don't want them to be bullied. I don't
Yeah.
want them to be, so I used to be like, oh, your little friend so-and-so. Oh, yeah, oh, it's cool. Sure, we'll have them over for tea, blah, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong. I love other people's kids, and we do have other people's kids over to play, but much less often, for much longer, more meaningful periods of time. And my kids, my daughter has done ballet every single weekend since she was 2 years old. The first thing she did when we were homeschooling was gave that up. She was like, ballet, I don't care for ballet. And I felt devastated. I was like, what about all your friends at ballet? She was like, no, I'd much rather roam around butt naked at home, playing with my brothers and jumping off the sofa. And we've got to get out of this headspace. And I think a lot of it is generated even by social media. We have this need to be connected, friends, this, that. We forget that those early years, they're babies, they're little tiny people forming what they need, a supportive family life. If they have siblings, great. If not, maybe a little bit more mixing with other families to just give them other children to tag in with, but they could be much older or much younger children. As you've made really clear with your son, then something transitions around age 8, 9, 10, something changes. And they naturally seek it, and they naturally seek friendships where they might actually be leading it. They might actually want to make phone calls or write a letter to their friend, or be like, well, so-and-so said they were doing this weekend. Do you think I could? My 6-year-old would never say that. She would never have the initiative to say that. But an older child does start to take that initiative. And similarly, they start to emerge again as the adult people they will become, anywhere from sort of 15 to 17, some even younger, some take a little longer, but somewhere in that spectrum, just when at school we box them in and we force them to basically remain children longer and go through a system that is trying to homogenize people that are all very, very different. Some people might be ready for work at a much younger age, younger than they legally can work in this country, and they don't really want to continue with studies. They're ready to do something like an apprenticeship or whatever. Other children want to study. Other children want to be out in the world, maybe adventuring, traveling. Peter Gray let his son travel from America to, I think it was the UK and then Paris, alone at age 13. I mean, it blows my mind. And I think he would actually get investigated by social services these days for it. And yet, people are all different. And he describes his son as just someone that he had complete faith could handle it.
I think also that we underestimate in the sort of social aspect how much children take from us as adults. So, I've watched my daughter recently. She struggled with some friendships, which actually I recognise was because it was a bit forced. It was like, I desperately wanted her to have friends. But actually more recently, I've observed her sort of doing things that I would do. So they're always, they're observing, they're absorbing everything in terms of how you deal with things, how you react to people, so those are, and I guess that's the same in the animal kingdom, isn't it, where they'll learn by their elders and their family around them. So I don't think we talk enough about that in terms of the socializing skills, and actually what do children get from that when they're in school? They're not getting that modeling. They're getting, actually, we're adults, we dictate to you what you do. So and actually, that's not true, and it doesn't make for great professional relationships as you get into whatever career or jobs or things you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We've really moved a long way from the natural way of doing things, and it's just so important. As I say, I think the opinion of people who have been in the system is so valuable for parents on the cusp of making that decision. Because it gives inside information, and because it provides a real clear insight into what we're doing that just doesn't work on a societal level and doesn't work on a basic human behavior level, and it's just as simple as that. It's not criminalizing or creating villains out of people who work in schools. We're all just people, but I think it's a total fallacy to think that we can make the system as it is better or a social enabler for children who come from backgrounds that we consider maybe to be less privileged. It's just such a fallacy, and I think it's important to deconstruct that, definitely.
No, I totally agree. I actually think we could probably do another podcast just about that. But just brings me on really to sort of a last sort of question in terms of, you have given loads of advice throughout the podcast, but just what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, who's just thinking, I'm going to do this?
Well, that's difficult, but there is a kind of fine line between reading and reading too much, particularly at the beginning, when I think it's really important to find your rhythm. So this is just from my experience, but if someone goes and does something totally different, everyone's different, right? I think choose a couple of books to read, because I do think a couple of touchstones as to how home education is done is useful. Maybe have one or two groups. I don't do social media at all, but I know people have found it very useful. Yeah. But I don't think being on it all the time, being bombarded by the ways that other people do things, is helpful. So if you have a couple of recommended groups that you might be able to extract some good information from, no harm in that, but don't overload yourself with that. And other than that, I do think go with your instinct, because, for example, we are really moving towards quite radical deschooling, like, the children having very similar rights in the household to us and decisions over things, and that feels really right for our family. But it isn't right for every family, and it wasn't right at the beginning for our family, because my daughter in particular was, maybe for the first couple of weeks, lost without school. She didn't miss it, she didn't want to go back, she didn't cry about any of her friends, she was actually very excited about homeschooling, but she did not know what to do with herself on a daily basis. And although in my mind I was very clear that I did not want to be teaching a timetable to my children, I was leading it quite a lot at the beginning and doing it quite a bit like, oh, it's Monday. What about, what about Geography Monday? And I was very conscious that this wasn't going to work long term. My son would just look at me like, what about this? No one can see the sign I'm giving over the podcast, but yeah, that was basically what my 4-year-old said. But the point is, my daughter needed that safety net of feeling like mummy was in charge, because she'd never been in charge before. She'd only ever been told what to do by nursery workers, teachers, me. And you are much more authoritative when your children are at school, because you have to be, because you're trying to run everything on a really strict timetable. And it's like, get in the car or we won't be there. So, my daughter taking control back over her life took a couple of weeks and months, and once she got there was no question for us, we were unschoolers. But the thing is, we weren't there straight away, and that wasn't necessarily me dipping into something that didn't work and then abandoning it. It was more like she needed that transition, because otherwise I think she would have started to feel shaky. And then the only other thing that I would say is that for us, the pandemic lockdown phase has been really beautiful for our family, and I'm very sorry that some people have had really traumatic experiences of it. I don't mean on an economic level, or it's been stressful for us too. My husband's job coming home, we haven't had that much space. It's been stressful, like for everyone, and we've been worried about the virus. But for us, as learning about our family and learning about who we are as people and what we enjoy doing and what works for us as a homeschooling routine, it's been wonderful, and we feel, hopefully emerging from it at some point, much clearer about where we are at and what's going to work for us, and how we learn, and how many groups we want to do and things like that. Yeah. And I think that at the beginning it was very exciting, it was a big adventure, but we were rushing around to lots of different things, more or less because I was trying to plug a hole that school had somehow filled. And home education isn't about that. And so if someone is considering home education, and maybe the lockdown is lifting even more, I mean, who knows, you might be going into second lockdown, but let's see. But what I'm trying to say is, try to create your own, not exactly lockdown, but try to almost just let things go and drift for at least a month or two. Don't worry if you spend the entire week and you haven't seen another family, because the thing is, life is long, and you can start to create meaningful relationships that you see on a regular basis down the line. But the most important thing at the beginning is to be happy in your own company. And this was a huge problem for many non-homeschooling families during the pandemic. That's not me saying, poor you guys, you have a horrible family. No. My family would have been just the same before we started homeschooling. No one's used to spending so much time with each other. Everyone feels panicked because you're not going out every day doing purposeful stuff. But just slowing time down, just allowing the day to just drift by. Maybe you won't make it to the park in the morning, maybe you'll make it there at 4 p.m, maybe you won't. It's just teaches you a lot about how learning happens and about how to be together. And that surely has to be the basis of happiness in life, you know?
I guess what you're describing there, that period of lockdown, is almost like what someone might do if they de-school. You know, we took
Enforced
three months,
deschooling, yeah.
you know, 3 months of doing that, and actually that for me was magic, because you start to, if you sit back and you observe your children and you talk to them, you start to see magical things that you didn't see before. It's like, actually, when I was a teacher, the best lessons were those that I was thrown into and I hadn't planned for, you know. It's that kind of like, but anyway,
absolutely.
Anna, that I really, really enjoyed that podcast this morning. Thank you so much for your time, and I feel slightly guilty that we've taken up some of your family holiday time, but
no, and I talk too much.
I'd like to say actually a huge thank you to you for your research, the book that you've written, you know, your blog, the sort of rawness and the questioning that is in your blog kind of has given me goosebumps on many occasions. And I just think, like, you know, it's some of the things you talk about is quite brave, and it's quite, you know, out there to sort of be putting yourself in those situations. And I just want to say thank you for that, because I think many people are going to benefit from that, and I'm really glad I found you and connected with you. So
thank
you very much.
And for anyone who questions the name of the blog, I apologize. Some people have said to me, why do you write Homeschool Guru when really you're so new to homeschooling? And what I've said to these people is, I did a little bit of reading on it, and I was really inspired by the idea of the guru, that in ancient India, gurus, they're not teachers, they're just philosophers. And gurus, really importantly, were disconnected from the king. So the king had no say over what the gurus would write. They were free thinkers. And that's why so many interesting and radically different philosophies exist in Sanskrit, is that they were never enforced to present a certain doctrine. It was just their own voice. And so what I wanted to get through this is, then I think anyone who reads one of my blog posts, is that I'm certainly not the Western vision of a guru. I'm not the person sat there going, come to the hill and you will learn. I'm a learner and a thinker in the original Indian sense of the kind of the guru that is just disconnected from any kind of way of thinking, that is just learning from life and from my kids and making as many mistakes as anyone else. But that's what it's about, and there's no need to fear it, you know?
Yeah, no, that's lovely. You should be proud of everything you've done. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
So I'm sure that's been really helpful to our lovely listeners. And if you have a different story or a situation that you'd like us to share, please send it to me. Send me a message via the website collageapp.co.uk. Everything that Anna's talked about in terms of books and her books and her blog, it will be on the show notes. So until next time, keep calm and carry on reading.